Hey guys, this video we're going to talk about the Husqvarna M96 long rifle, the rifle made for the Swedish civilian shooting market. So Husqvarna is a private Swedish arms maker that they made Remington rolling blocks in the in the late 1800s for Sweden. Later on they made the Browning M07 pistols, and they later on they made the Lottie pistols. So they're pretty close with the Swedish government as far as making guns for them. Now, when the Swedish government is wanting to make their M38 rifles, they're kind of having shortcomings at their own government arsenal. So then they reach out to Husqvarna to start making these M38 rifles, these M38 short rifles for the military. And along with that order also comes an order for a small batch of M96 long rifles for the Swedish FSR. Which is a really long Swedish word that I'll just put on the screen here. That's basically the civilian shooters movement, or in the US it would be something kind of related to like the CMP. It's an organization that would kind of give these government arms to the Swedish civilians to shoot. They wanted to encourage marksmanship and everything in Sweden to kind of maintain this high level of Swedish marksmanship in the civilian side. In case they need to pull in, civilians into the military. They're a small country. That's kind of like what smaller countries tend to do. Kind of like Switzerland's a prime example of that. So Husqvarna started making the M96 long rifles in 1942. I believe that continued on to 1944, but most of them that I see tend to be dated 1943 like this one is. The serial number range that these FSR made rifles is from 686,000 to 704,000. That's an approximate serial range, so it's approximately 18,000 of these M96 rifles were made for the for the FSR program. So probably something the more keen-eyed viewers of you out there noticed with this gun is the lack of stock disc in it. And now the reason for that is because this gun wasn't really in the Swedish military. So there wasn't a whole system to grade and add the stock discs into these guns, because these guns, they stayed with the FSR, they stayed with the Swedish civilians. So these guns never really got that whole sort of bore gauge that a lot of the stock discs have. So that's one of the key ways that you can tell one of these apart, just by looking and seeing. Probably a lot of people have incorrectly added those discs later on. The Swedes, they tended to do all sorts of things with this hole. If they didn't just leave it like this, sometimes they would do anything from, they'd put a coin in there, or maybe if they won a medal at a shooting competition, they would stick that in there. Sometimes they would just fill this in with wood filler. They would just do a variety of things to these, so you can kind of see them all ways. Most of these I've seen are just plain and empty, like this one is here. The Swedes use the same stocks that they used on their M38 rifles. They use this stained red beech wood, which is quite nice. A lot of these FSR guns, when you find them like this one, they seem to be in really good shape, obviously because these didn't have a harsh life in the military, so the stocks tend to be really nice. This one has a really beautiful blued receiver. The bolts are obviously left in the white, so these guns tend to be in really, really nice shape. So it's my opinion that Husqvarna made Mausers are probably the highest quality Mausers made by any country ever, pretty much. The attention to detail in these guns is pretty fantastic. An example of that is with these barrels. So the Husqvarna, they got a batch of CG barrels from the government to make these M96s out of. And they didn't like the government barrels because they weren't up to as high a quality spec as actual Husqvarna barrels. So Husqvarna, obviously this gun shoots 6.5 Swede. So the bore tolerances that the Swedish government accepted for Swedish military M96s is actually 6.48 to 6.52. So basically a 0.02 kind of difference from 6.5. However, Husqvarna, they only accepted barrels that were from 6.49 to 6.5. So pretty much they only accepted barrels that were perfect. Obviously they made sure the barrels were, hand finished and straightened. These guns are just exceedingly accurate. So most of the M96s that left Husqvarna pretty much left there in the same exact overall condition. They all left with this sort of ASG style rear sight. I'll show this in more detail in a little bit. Now, one of the things the FSR was known for is adding diopter sights to their Mauser rifles. Now, they didn't only do this to the Husqvarna rifles. A lot of actual like Swedish military-made M96 rifles you can find that had these diopter sights fitted on them. Every now and then you'll find an M96 long rifle that'll have sort of 2 holes back here. And let me tell you, those you can actually get a really good deal on, because most people assume that these 2 holes drilled back here on the receiver bridge were done by Bubba, when in fact it was a legit like Swedish government shooting program thing. So the FSR, they would drill 2 holes in the back of this receiver bridge. They'd mount a diopter sight. They'd put a real big front sight on it, and that is what I have here. This is a Husqvarna M96 rifle with these FSR diopter sights fitted on them. About the sights, they're pretty excellent target sights. These aren't really like battle sights. I wouldn't want to take these into combat or anything, because it's just too fine of a sight that obscures too much of your overall vision downrange. However, in a target competition, these sights excel. This rifle with these sights is probably one of the most accurate bolt actions out there. Like the other M96 I just showed you, this one as well, doesn't have a stock disc because these were never fitted with them. This is also made in 43. I highlighted the receiver so you can kind of see it a little bit better on this one. No rear sight in this one, because if it has the diopters, it doesn't need a rear sight. And then it has this nice big front sight on here. Now let's get in and do some close-ups of these guns. So here's a close-up of the receivers. The bluing is rather nice and shiny on these, so it kind of reflects a lot of these lights. I filled this one in with white chalk just so that you could see a little bit better, but this is kind of how they come from the factory. It just sort of says, Husqvarna, a bunch of other Swedish words, and then I'll have the date here. Both of these are 1943, which I think is probably the most common year for these. Now here's the rear sight that came on most of these Husqvarna M96s. These are pretty nice rear sights. Obviously right now it's just set to 100 meters, and all you have to do is just turn this knob to the range that you'd like. It's really nice, as you turn it. Obviously this just lifts up. These just have a plain 1-step sight base, unlike the 3-step sight bases that you'll find on the military rifles. So one of the things about these Husqvarna Mausers, and this includes the M38s, is that after heat treating, the steel on the receiver is just too hard to stamp the name in. So typically the inspector would stamp their initials on the side of a standard, like Carl Gustaf manufactured or Mauser Oberndorf made M96. But on these M96s and on the M38s, because the steel is too hard to stamp on the receiver, these instead were stamped with the acceptor's initials here. So we have an SS right there. So that SS stands for, I'm going to mispronounce his name, but Weapon Officer Sten Valdemar Stenmo. I don't know the correct Swedish pronunciation of that name, so I apologize, but his initials is stamped there after he inspected this rifle, and this is found on pretty much all Husqvarna made Mausers, kind of starting in late 42. So here's the diopter rear sight on the other one. So they pretty much just drill and tap 2 holes in this receiver bridge. This piece just fits on kind of perfectly, and there's 2 screws that hold this whole sight to it. There's different brands of these diopter rear sights. This one just happens to be, it's kind of shiny. It happens to be an elite rear sight, or lit. I'm not sure how that's pronounced. Rear sight. So here's an up-close view of the front sight. So this whole piece just slides on. There's the existing front sight base here was left on. This piece just slides in, and there's 2 screws holding it on. This piece here can be screwed off to have different sights added on the inside. There's all sorts of different front sight arrangements, so that you can either have a standard kind of front sight post looking arrangement, or you can kind of have like a circle for a front sight. So you could kind of be looking through a circle, so you can see your target kind of in the hole in the front sight. And here's a close-up look at that stock disc hole. Husqvarna really didn't number these like they did the military guns. You won't find a number here on the rear band or a number on the front band. like you do with the military ones. Instead, what you find is this tilted crown. So most Swedish parts will have some sort of crown stamped on it. However, the Swedes are known for putting this, tilted crown. So if you see a part that has a tilted crown on it, that's how you know that it's a Husqvarna made part. If the crown is just, normal, straight up and down, then it's a, it's probably a military, like a CG or Oberndorf made gun. Here's an up close look at the follower. Same thing, no numbers, just this standard tilted crown. They did put numbers on parts that matter though, and a lot of times you will find the numbers here on the bolt knob. There's also a number on the back of the safety here, not on the cocking piece though. So these aren't as heavily numbered as the standard military M96s are. So if you see this on one, don't be alarmed. Those aren't replacement parts or anything. That's just how the guns left the factory. So these Husqvarna M96s are pretty uncommon in the US market today. I'm assuming in other countries they're uncommon today, except for maybe Sweden, because these Husqvarna M96s, they were in the FSR. They were in, Sweden civilian hands. So as the Swedish government is selling off and surplusing all of their, old Mausers, these stayed in Sweden. These stayed in Swedish civilian hands. So therefore, they're not super common in the US market. These demand quite a bit more money than just run-of-the-mill kind of M96s. Obviously, I think it's definitely worth it because they are just an excellent example of what a Swedish Mauser can be if it's pretty much time capsule perfect, kind of like these are. I would really bet that a Husqvarna M96 like this, especially one with diopter sights like this one, I would really bet that something like this could go toe-to-toe with the most accurate milsurp, like a Swiss K31 or a Swiss 1911, something like that. These guns are just exceedingly accurate. So I appreciate everyone for liking and commenting on my videos. It really helps keep me motivated to make this content in the future. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.